handsome buck could have been a gay buck.
Even the shy kid is still horny, right?
Pavement princess.
Yeah, showing off their racks. They're beautiful, but they're not fighters.
The state of Vermont realized eradicated whitetail from the landscape, brought in deer from Virginia and Michigan by train.
That's sick.
Of Virginia genetics and the Taconics. In Vermont, we've got like two different kind of deer. Native Virginia deer, much smaller antler genetics for sure.
Hey everybody, this is Kyle with Bows, Bros, and Bucks. Thank you so much for watching. This is episode number 17. Hope you guys enjoy it. We are visited by Izaak Young. He's a big buck slayer from Vermont. He comes down here to Mass in New Hampshire and kills all of our deer. No, I'm just kidding. But he's a buck slayer and he is with Northwoods Whitetails, and here's this podcast.
Do you want to kind of introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and how you got into hunting?
Yep. So my name is Izaak Young. I'm from Rutland County, Vermont, and I've been hunting my whole life. My dad started taking me hunting when I couldn't even walk. Like I'd go on this like little backpack thing and sitting on his feet while he was bow hunting in a tree stand. Like I was just a little guy. So I've kind of always been in the woods.
That's awesome. And when did you get into YouTube? Was that like once you got like that big buck or what?
No. So I'd gotten a couple good ones before I started doing YouTube. I guess somebody asked me this when I was down at Huntstock, and I think the best was when I was younger. I used to run beagles with my buddy Mike, and we have such good cottontail hunting, like right around my house where I grew up, and we got to the point where we were kind of shooting. We were shooting a lot of rabbits every time we went because the dog was getting good and we were getting good at it. We were doing it a lot. And so my mom had gotten me like a camcorder, and for whatever reason, my buddy and I would, he would film, and then I would, when I would get one, we'd switch, and we would only shoot the rabbits if we got it like good on the camera. Mm-hmm. So therefore we were letting a ton of rabbits go. And that's just kind of, I don't know if that's just how my mind works or what, but that's just like the evolution of how I do stuff in the woods. I guess with deer hunting, I did it for a long time, kind of shot a lot of smaller bucks, and then started shooting some better bucks. And I was like, well, maybe I should start filming it now, so describe it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well, I said this on my last podcast. The reason I started doing is my dad kind of like grew up filming everything for us. Like I have 3 older brothers, and he just always had a camera out. So that was kind of something that got me into it. We always made like funny home videos, like my brothers and I do, like Sports Center, not top 10 plays or all that stuff. And then I was just like, hey, I'm just going to film for fun. So I'm a hunter first, and photography and all that stuff's not my basis. That's why not all my stuff's in like 4K and special. So
right, you're just kind of learning it as you go.
I've learned a lot in this last year though.
Really? That's cool. Yeah, I know I've definitely come a long ways from when I had started, but my wife's cousin is actually really good at like editing, and he like grew up doing it. He's had a YouTube for like since he was like 10 years old. So like he's like super advanced, and he kind of took me under his wing starting out editing, and I asked him a ton of questions, and he got me going on like Final Cut Pro, which is like a good software, which is very difficult to learn if you have no background in editing. If you don't come from that background, it's tough. But he showed me a lot, and that was, I think, one of the reasons why I was able to advance like quickly with it, in a way.
Yeah, I think I have that same pool table in our house.
Do you? That's funny.
Are the legs plastic?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
We have the same one. It's the
That's
exact
great.
same kind. That's funny.
That's
So
funny.
are those all bucks that you shot in the back?
Yeah. Yep. Those are some of my mounts.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a Vermont deer right there.
Does
So
that have a
he's
drop
got
tine?
a
I can't
like
tell.
a yeah. He's got a big old drop tine, and then he's got like a double main beam. He's a
Heck
super
yeah.
rare deer. Like that will always be my overshot. That's my heaviest buck. He weighed 205. But where I shot that deer is very remote and very like rugged country. And it's known for 110-inch 8 points. Like 110-inch 8 point is like a good buck. There has been some big ones to come out of that range, in the past 100 years or whatever, but rare. Rarely do they ever much of anything. And he has a 115-inch 8 point mainframe, and then he's got like 16 inches of uh, non-typical points or whatever.
Yeah.
But so he's a 130-inch buck, and it's just super special. Like I've killed bigger bucks score wise, but that buck will always, just from like where he came from,
Oh yeah.
it's just super special to me. But
Well, it's funny how that works because
eh,
especially in New England, people don't really understand sometimes
oh
how
yeah,
hard it is to get a buck over 120 inches, 115 inches. They're just not
oh
around
yeah,
every tree. But like, so I've gotten ones like as close to a neighborhood as like physically like possible, like right on the limit of getting permission from people and then being that 166 yards away or whatever. And it's kind of
yep,
funny. I've shot ones like that, but then I've also shot ones that are like in giant woods where there's never people, and that's also kind of cool too. So
mm-hmm.
there's kind of a mix in New England that you can get, and that's why I'm excited to cover more ground because like when I went to Idaho, it was very common you could drive around any river bottom in the fields and see a 140-inch deer right before sunset. It's just you couldn't hunt it because it's all
Wow,
private, but you could see one whenever you wanted. So it was just kind of
no
kind of
kidding.
different. Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah, no, it's cool.
interesting.
Are you in southern New Hampshire?
Yeah, so I actually live in Brookline.
Okay, yeah, I don't know where that is, but southern New Hampshire is really cool because you can do like more of an urban like stuff, and then you don't really have to go too far, and you're into bigger woods. Where I'm at, I'm I'm at least an hour from like urban stuff, I would say. Like truly urban stuff. Like I think the closest urban stuff to me would be like over near like probably like the Queensbury, New York area. You could probably get into some urban. But yeah, in Vermont, like where I'm at, it's super rural. And even like the biggest city near me, Rutland, it's the biggest city in the state, but there's not really any urban hunting opportunities in that city. It's like you have the inner city where there's no deer, and then like the surrounding areas of the city where there are some deer. You just don't seem to ever. I honestly, what I think it is just so many people that hunt in Vermont. A city person has like, let's say, a 4 pointer in their backyard all the time. They probably end up telling their friend that hunts or their family member that hunts, and then they just go in there and whack it. So you don't get to see those like giant urban bucks in Vermont
Yeah.
because I think they just get shot. Like even that's in Vermont. It's all about age. Like if you want a big buck, and I think that's like true to New England in a sense. Maybe not so.
Oh,
Like there's some
100%.
areas in New England where a three deer will be 110 inches, but not very many. A lot of New England, it's like you need to get that older age structure, that 5 to like 8.5. That's like where those really big those bucks are. And the key around me is just getting back, getting in some big woods, and getting to places where other people aren't, and that's where you find the bigger deer. And then there's also posted property, super tightly posted, that will also produce, especially if it's like an out of stater that doesn't hunt, that will also like produce a, a older bucks, So if you can hunt the edges of those types of properties, but yeah, I just think it's interesting that you guys down in the suburbs, like in southern New Hampshire, it's crazy with those urban bucks, like what they'll do. Like they get big.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like where I live, the town that I live in is kind of interesting because I'd say probably over the last 30 years, there's been three book bucks that are like 150 or over ever.
Yeah.
But those are just the ones entered, of course. I only know of three, and I know quite a few people, but I've only heard of 3 to 5 that are over 140 inches, I'd say, in my specific town. But a lot of those deer come from other places, like the one that I hunted that was a top 10 all time. It actually lived in Massachusetts. So it would come up after the summer during the rut. So it'd come here like October 28th and then stay around till like December 18th, like the secondary rut. So he could breed the
Yep.
fawns that were going to estrus for the first time. So he would kind of pick those up. But it's kind of interesting. Like one guy was telling me about this double drop tine buck that he killed in Mason, New Hampshire, which is close to me, and that buck traveled 12 miles from Mass. Like they have trail camera videos of it in Velvet, bunch of people 12 miles away. And say it's the 100% the same deer. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah, they'll definitely move a lot. It's I don't know if you've ever seen some of the collared deer stuff that's been in the news in the last few years, but I know there was even a buck in New Hampshire that they collared that did like 90 something miles away from its home range during the rut, which is crazy. And then there's one out in Missouri, I believe, that was like 140 miles it went. Like during the gun season too. It was crazy. I
yeah.
forget the number of 10 major highways or something. It's like it's funny. I think some of these guys, when they end up with a big deer and nobody knows where it comes from, it could literally be coming from like 80 miles away.
Yeah.
like it's just so nuts. It blows my mind how far those things will go. And bears will too. I don't know if you ever heard of how far bear will.
No.
They will go. Oh yeah, like they collared a bear one time in I want to say like northern New Hampshire, and that thing went all the way down through the center of Vermont a little bit, and then he went down to like Connecticut, and then back
Jeez.
up to northern New Hampshire. So I mean, bears are doing that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah. No, it's wild.
It's
Like
fun.
out west, there's mule deer that's I think the record was like 220 miles from summer to winter range,
Wow,
which is ridiculous how much country that is. Like that's absurd.
that's a lot
How
of
many,
country.
you know how many fences there is
Hmm.
in Wyoming? Like that is so many
Yeah,
fences. And like here, I'd say probably 40% of the bucks are killed by cars, like the big ones that like they just
really.
reach maturity. And I work with a lot of kids that come out to work for the company I work for and manage, and they come out from out west and they're like, dude, I guarantee you probably half of these bucks never see a person in their life, like in the big woods, or like nobody sees them, I guess. And I was like, well, it's
Right.
it's
Yeah.
possible just because out there it's so open. Here they could hide in the middle of nowhere.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's interesting, but I've definitely noticed the difference between like a Midwest. You can hold a deer on 40 to 200 acres here that would be impossible. Like you just can't. Maybe does, maybe a smaller doe
Right.
range, but I've never found a buck in New England that had that small of a core area where you could like keep it on a property. So for me, I like that you guys
Right.
kind of travel around and you don't necessarily, not that you don't target a specific buck, but you're just going for your best hunt on your first hunt.
That is primarily my game, and I mean, I have history with a lot of bucks. I run a ton of game cameras all over New England, and I mostly just do it for fun, really, because when you boil it down, I'm pretty random where I hunt. I usually just target big country and something new usually, but um, there are bucks that I have history with, and I will try hunting, but I've just never really been that style of hunter. And I mean, I think it's good and bad, because sometimes I think, you know, some of these bucks that I have history with, if I would just kind of buckle down and hunt them for like 3 or 4 days in a row, it'd probably be a good thing. But I just, and that's something I'm working on. I do need to, especially when conditions aren't good, I should try to just stick to areas where I know there's a really big buck in the vicinity. But yeah, it's just funny. I've always just wandered like crazy as soon as I got my drive around. But,
Yeah, this year I've covered more ground scouting and just driving places to check it out because like in the past when I lived here, like I would go to church. I was always playing sports. Like I played 4 high school sports, so like I never had time for anything else. And when I
mm,
did go scouting, it was like during shed hunting season. So it was just
yep.
yeah, I just never really did it, and my parents wouldn't let me hunt by myself. So when I wanted to bring my dad, scent control was out of the window, and going deep into the woods was out of the window too. So
Yeah, he doesn't. That's funny.
yeah, so
Um,
it's
he
kind of
doesn't. He
different.
doesn't like to get back. He doesn't like to get back in there.
He's just I don't know. He's a little bit older ish. Like my dad's like 60, so I don't know. He's
Okay.
also
Yep.
just not a hunter, so but
Oh,
this
okay. No, I
this
hear
year
you.
I'm
I
gonna
hear you.
put him on my first year. It's just like he'll sit there, but he did it because he knew I loved it. He didn't do it because he
Right.
wanted to, and that was kind of the difference. Just because
Right.
it's when he goes 20 times and he never saw a deer, that would kind of put you at a I don't really want to do this environment because you're not seeing a lot of deer, and I think that's what it was. So,
Right.
and we didn't know
No,
what we
and
were
and
doing.
that kind of right. Well, yeah. That kind of when you said that, it kind of brought something up that like what I was thinking about the last thing you said about um, hunting different spots all the time. I think one of the reasons why I do it is because it's always new. It's fun. It's like an adventure. I'm going. I don't know what I'm gonna find. I don't know what bucks live there, and I think it like keeps it really fun for me. Whereas, like you said, if you go to a spot and you don't see a deer 20 times, like 20 sits or whatever, it can get very boring and not fun anymore. So I think that's why, like, I'm a tracker. If I have snow, like that's the only way I'll hunt. Like, it doesn't matter if I have a buck, you know, let's say I had a buck come into a scrape 2 or 3 days. If it was the third day and I got snow, I'd be trying to go get on a track and track. Like I just love to track, and I think it's because it just it's so much fun all the time. It's so
Yeah.
much fun.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like even if we got snow here, I almost couldn't track deer unless I went to another part.
Right.
Just because there's so
Hmm.
much, any of the big woods is posted for the most part, or it's like a sanctuary, like a Beaver Brook
Yep.
Association or whatever. So a lot of it's like bow hunt only, shotgun only, that kind of
Yep.
stuff. But there's some places where you could potentially do it, and that's why I kind of want to go up north this year because I have some spots where, like, I found a good spot where there's a 12 pointer this year in New Hampshire, and he's been an 11 point and a 12 point off and on for 3 years now. So he's a
Wow.
good buck, and my buddy found his shed this year, and we got him on camera, and he's a 11 this year. Didn't really grow. It's kind of weird in New Hampshire. It's like sometimes they'll have on and off years, and sometimes they just don't grow the time length that we think. It makes no sense. It's like the electric buck. When I saw it, I was like, that's not as big as I thought it would be. But then you see his sheds and you're like, holy crap. Like, okay, he was bigger than
Well, right. It could just be because the buck's getting old, and they
exactly.
do, I think, go down. They go downhill. I know I read one time that a guy that raised deer, he said a lot of the times 7.5 is the best year for antler growth on a buck.
Yep.
I've also seen bucks that were 9.5 and they put antler on every single year. But I think the average is 7.5 is like peak antler growth year, and every year after that is pretty much you lose an inch or two here and there, and then you know you end up. I think a lot of them end up at like a pretty much a base. Let's say they go from a 160 and then kind of down to a 140, and then it seems they'll kind of just like stay around that 140 mark for the rest of
Yep.
their lives. But then I've heard guys chasing where they like literally turn into like a really big 4-pointer, like big beams and like
Yep.
heavy, and they just have the twos. But they're all different. They're like people. Like we're all
Yeah.
different. We grow differently. We age differently. It's all genetics and what they're eating and how stressful their lives are. But and the ground that they're on. Because I swear, if you can figure out where the good ground is for like antler growth, I mean, people would be amazed. Like they're not. It's like I've found areas that are like, let's say, 10 square miles. 10 square miles that just produces bigger rack bucks compared
Yeah.
to all the other parts around it. If you can find, and I don't know what that it is in the ground that makes for bigger antlers or what. Some people say they don't believe that, but I mean, it has to be true. The genetics can't be from this town to 2 towns over. You know what I mean?
No,
But
no, that where that 12 pointer is, like where I'm talking about, there is a 10-point genetic and a 12-point genetic, and every buck will reach its potential if it gets old enough. Majority of, but you can't say that for everything. There's going to be a 6-point or something, obviously, but
yep,
majority of the bucks are like they're trying to grow the 10-point rack if they get old enough. But here we just have like an 8-point,
yep,
like that's just like the genetic. But this one
genetic, yep,
particular
yep,
town, all the I would knock a bunch of the neighbors, even if they're hunters, just to look at their mounts, and it was all the same
yep,
genetics. It was high beams, like long wide racks, and it was cool to see because like different places like here, I feel like compared to the Midwest, we need a year or two extra for maturity for their antlers. I think here 7.5
yep,
is 6.5 to 7.5 is where they reach their peak, where in other states 4.5 to 5.5 could be, I'd say 5.5 is when most bucks reach their maturity in other places. And then they start to get trash here when they get older, which you don't really see when
yep.
they're younger. Um, Once they hit a certain age, like my buddy killed 113-inch. What was it? I think it was a 10-point, and I gave him the spot, and he was on the ground, and he just rattled, and the thing ran up to him. He shot it with the rifle. It didn't
Nice.
move. It didn't move. It just shook, and then he shot it again and dropped it. And it
Wow.
it had no time length whatsoever, but it just had mass and it had points, and it was 6.5. So it should have been a bigger rack,
Right.
but it was a good body and stuff. So it's kind of interesting how that works. But ironically, don't know if this is a thing, but I don't know if it's the soil or the genetics in the area. I know that like culling is a myth because I've done a lot of research on it. It doesn't matter what
Oh,
you
for sure
shoot.
it is. Yeah.
The genetics in an area are going to be the same when Native Americans were around versus today. That's just the way
Right.
it is because you're going to be having spikes and younger bucks breed dose. That's the facts. But the lake near where I'm hunting this year, where there's big bucks, happens to be one of the best bass fishing lakes around. And I'm like, it's interesting how this lake that produces a lot of big bass produces a lot of big deer. And I think the state record in Georgia, state record bass and state record deer were in the same county too. So I don't know, it's just weird.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely something in the soil. It has something to do, like the minerals, everything that the deer, because I'm in the Midwest, deer that they feed all these like supplements to, and they're like all on soybeans and whatever, they grow big racks because they have all that nutrition to go to their antlers and stuff. So I think you break that down on kind of a different level in the Northeast, where it's like, okay, they're all kind of eating the same stuff, browse, acorns, beech nuts. But if your soil has like a higher whatever mineral content, they're going to be getting better nutrition by any means. This is just kind of my own theories, but I think the ground definitely has a lot to do with it. And you just talking about that, they're kind of brought up an interesting thing about Vermont. Vermont was almost extinct of whitetails in the early 1900s, late 1800s, kind of in that area, because the entire state was all sheep. There's tons of sheep farms, the whole state, and sheep eat everything. So after like 100 years of sheep farming, any trees in the state. The only places that there was trees were the biggest mountains where they couldn't farm sheep because they're just too big and too steep, too whatever. So when the state of Vermont realized that we had like basically eradicated whitetail from the landscape, they all got shot and they didn't have any woods to live in. Deer need cover and whatever. But the state brought in deer from Virginia and Michigan. The deer,
I did not
by
know that.
train. Yeah, they brought them by train.
That's sick.
Yep. Huh. Yep. And I know the town that they released the deer in, and it's actually pretty close to me. And that town is always pretty high up in numbers for like deer kill, that's kind of funny. Like that's where they got repopulated in the state, and that's still where some of the best numbers for whitetails are in the state.
Should have released deer from Iowa,
the point
not Michigan.
I'm trying to make, right, or Virginia. Yeah, we have a ton of Virginia genetics in the Taconics, which is the mountain range that I live in. But so in Vermont, you've got like two different kind of deer. You've got the native type deer, and that's what I'd call that one that I shot. I'd say he was probably a descendant of what Vermont deer were, like let's say 200-300 years ago. And then you have the Virginia, which is a much smaller, shittier antler genetics for sure. Like the Virginia, like I know we have a ton of Virginia deer genetics, and in the area that I'm in, a big buck weighs 160 pounds, 100 inches at 5 years old, like that kind of thing. And nothing wrong with that, just what we have. But then I think you even get a mix of the two. So it's kind of funny how that is, but still to this day on the big mountains around here, you can see some buck that has 130-inch rack, which it's just I'm so fascinated by like the genetics and everything like that. That's why I kind of, I don't know, I get like real deep when trying to figure out where these big deer are.
No, it's super cool. Like based on the area, like you said, it just takes age. And the culture, I think, has changed in New Hampshire from if it's brown, it's down. It's changed, I think, since we've seen what Pennsylvania has done.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
With antler restrictions, I think
so I misstated this. It was actually the Milo Hansen buck that was 3.5.
They're passing more deer, like younger kids. Like I passed 25 bucks my first year really bow hunting by myself, which
Wow.
I should never have done because I would have a lot more deer on my wall. They just wouldn't be as big. But
Yep.
me passing 115-inch 8-point with my shotgun is just like my neighbor was pissed at me. But then
Yep.
deer 2 or 3 years later, now it's on his wall and it's 150 inches. So I
Exactly. Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. But I think the huff buck or whatever that giant one was like a 3.5-year-old. So like you said, it's just genetics too. So
That's what they said he was 3.5. Yeah, no, I've gotten to hold the the antlers of that buck, and it's unbelievable. Like it is one of the best typicals of all time.
oh yeah,
Like it is just
it's more impressive than the Milo
absolute
Hansen buck
giant.
to me.
Yeah,
Just because of the mass.
I
Well,
mean
I don't know.
it
It's hard.
is so amazing because, and this is kind of a funny little rabbit hole we can get down, is the Hanson buck could have been a gay buck
Really.
because where he was in Saskatchewan, all the bucks, they always break antlers because they fight so much. There's so many bucks in that area. And every buck everyone shoots up there always has a bunch of busted tines because they just fight like crazy. And that delicate rack, and it had such amazing tine length. And it's just too hard to believe that that buck ever fought with a buck, because if he did,
Yeah.
he would have busted his rack up. So it kind of leads me to believe that that buck didn't really want much to do with the rut. Like he probably, I know it's really crazy to say, but had like lower testosterone levels than
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of the other bucks. And maybe he wasn't gay, but he was just didn't want to breed like the other bucks. I mean, that
I
I've heard.
don't believe that it's a not wanting to breed because even the shy kid is still horny, right? So
Yep,
it's I
yep,
I think
yep,
personally it's a social stress thing. I see the biggest
yep,
buck that I've seen in Massachusetts this year, which is a 150-inch buck, was hanging out with a doe and two fawns. And he
yep.
was never the whole summer he was not with a bachelor group. And I'm not saying that's
Yep.
frequent. I'm saying that sometimes there's those, what do they call it? What do they call trucks that are like a princess truck? What is it called? Oh,
Pavement Princess.
yeah, pavement princess. Like they're just showing off their racks and they're beautiful, but they're not fighters. So there's just two different. It's
Hmm.
just they all have different personalities. Some are fighters and they're just gonna like they don't care what's on their head. They're just gonna bull you over. Because like in mule deer
Oh yeah.
country, there's big fork horns. I have one that's got a 20-inch G2 and he's a 2-point, and that thing I guarantee would horse the crap out of a 180-inch 4x4 just because he could just stab you. I just call
Right.
it the
Yeah.
devil buck, but
No, that's cool, and they do all have different personalities. Um, my favorite kind of buck to hunt is the really aggressive, angry buck, especially in big country, because you can just, like, I've hunted. There's a buck that I've hunted for. It's gonna be the fourth year this year. I actually missed him in 2020. Uh, yeah, so this would be the fourth year I've hunted him. I missed him in 2020, and I know because he's like a dinosaur. He's so old and whatever, but he just loves to pound on huge trees, and like it's so cool hunting him because he just leaves so many pieces to the puzzle. Almost too many pieces of the puzzle.
yeah,
Honestly, he just literally just annihilates thigh-sized trees everywhere he goes, and it's a lot of fun to hunt a deer like that. But the truth of the matter is, though, a lot of those bucks get killed young, I think, just because of all the sign they lay down. You
yep.
know, in smaller blocks of woods, those bucks don't usually make it long. But
Well, and they
this
come
buck
into
has got it
calling because a lot of unexperienced hunters call too
right.
much.
right? And if it's a super aggressive deer, they're gonna come in. But this buck I'm talking about, he's got an epic range. Like my buddy Connor and I have pictures of him, like 12 miles apart, very frequently, like in the same week. Like I'll get a picture of him, and then he'll get a picture of him over there, and it's like the amount of country between here and there. It's all just like vast woods, like big mountains. Like so that's why he's tough to kill. But
Is that the one in
I
New
have
Hampshire I
also
was telling him about? That he was like, "Oh, I hunt him too."
Connor. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know what buck you're talking. I don't know what one you're talking
No,
about,
there's a
but
big
what
one.
I'm
There's
talking.
like 5 or 6 guys after him, and he's just got a giant core range, and he's like a 180 plus.
Oh wow. Oh, actually, yeah. No, I know what you're. I think I know what you're talking about. I've been looking for that deer too.
Yep. I feel like everybody
Uh,
has.
yeah. I mean, you kind of have to, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
he's too big, and like I've told Connor, that deer is definitely living in somebody's backyard somewhere. That is just that's the only thing I can think because it's just too many guys hunting that deer to not have
Every
killed him
video
yet.
I've
But
seen of him on trail camera and the one that I have, he's just walking at such a fast pace on my at least the ones I've seen. But I've heard of people at least 8 miles away finding his sheds and different things. So it's like I don't know.
yeah, it is
It's
super
all
funny how that
hearsay.
is.
I don't know, but who knows?
Yeah, I know. It is cool though. It's fun to hunt these big deer, but
So enough about genetics and stuff. We'll get into some strategies and stuff. Do you
okay.
do you have any specific deer you're going after? What are your strategies for early season? Um, like where are you gonna start out this season?
So this season I'm going to start deer hunting over in New Hampshire, September 15th. But I won't be able to hunt the 15th. I have to work, but I'll be 16th, 17th. In those days, I will be on a primary scrape, most likely. I don't know which one, but I'll probably be on one. And if that doesn't produce, most likely to like I'll do in the morning for a few hours, and then I'll do a big scout somewhere probably. And if I find something good, I'll hang there because I saddle hunt. So I have a mobile setup. But if I don't find anything good on my scouting missions, I'll just go back and hang on another primary scrape for the evening. But if I can find a lot of green rubs that first weekend, I'll hunt right where those green rubs are. And if you can find a lot of green rubs that time of year, you're right on top of them. And that's what I.
Yeah, for me, I have mixed feelings about rub lines. It's like besides the first week of bow season, that's the only time I'll hunt rubs. Other than that, I never
Mhm.
hunt rubs personally, unless it's a signpost, of course. Besides that, I never hunt
Mhm.
rubs. I just look at it and see, oh, that's historical data. That's cool because I know once they shed their velvet and once they rub, they're leaving for the most part. Generally, unless you're in the middle of nowhere and he's bedding in that area and it's kind of obvious he's coming in and out of that swamp to bed.
Right.
But
Right. Yeah, no, rubs are they're a funny thing. Like that first week, like I said, the September 15th area, they're in their summer range for most part. If not their summer range, it's like somewhere between their summer and fall range. And if you can catch them in that spot where they're making a lot of those rubs that time of year, they're literally like you probably blew the deer out of there already when you find all those green rubs. That's what I mean. Another thing is too is like you can find some of these bachelor groups of 3 or 4 bucks, and they'll just be rubbing the crap out of everything, and they'll still be together. They'll still all kind of be in one little group, and yeah, those rubs are no good when the deer shift. But even into the later part of October, if I'm finding, consistent fresh buck sign, I'll set up somewhere near it. But situational signposts are really cool. I've never shot one off a signpost, but boy, that end of October, early November time frame, you could kill a good buck off signpost for sure.
Yeah, I just keep it in the memory bank of they know they've left sign there, so just treat it as it's a community place where they can know what deer are in the area, because it's a different type of scent. Obviously, it's the gland on their forehead. It's not the saliva like with a scrape, a real scrape, not like a mock scrape. You can do it all you want, but a specific primary scrape will have like a car size window, obviously, for always be bare to the ground. But there will be that one branch, the licking branch, where it's literally they'll peel it. Looks like they just peeled it with their mouth, and they have a little most people probably know this, and I'm sure you do, but they have like a gland in the back of their mouth that they can tell any deer that's been in the area just based on like peeling that in their mouth. And that's an area where you might not always see them in daylight, but they're probably going downwind of it just to check as well.
Right. Yeah. And a big thing about community scrapes in the middle of September is a lot of big bucks will daylight on those scrapes in September.
Yep.
Like if New Hampshire opened on September 1st, I would have a big one every year, because between September 1st and September 15th, that's when it seems like the most daylight, big, like top tier buck daylighting. Like that's when they daylight, September 1st to September 15th. It seems like to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's just before things heat up and there's still vegetation everywhere, and they're a different animal. Once they go hard horned, they really switch what they do. You got to get a little more tricky with them for sure. But they will, in my experience, they will daylight community scrapes again between like October. I want to say October like 16th to like you know frame. Like they'll daylight community scrapes, but it'll only be a couple times.
Yeah.
In that window, like you have to be super I'm gonna say lucky to be there when he does do it. Usually you just get him on camera doing it, one or two times between that October 16th to November 5th time range. But then it seems like after that November 5th time range, scrapes are pretty useless. In my opinion, a lot of the bucks they'll hit them if they come by them, but a lot of times I think a lot of your bigger bucks are locked down with does and running does all over the place, and they're cruising. So I think that's important for a lot of newer hunters to grasp, is after that early November time frame, you shouldn't even really be hunting scrapes like you were. But I think hunting does, if you don't have snow to track, obviously that's my favorite way to do it. If there's like a group area and they're always there, you're better off hunting that group of does than you are that community scrape that was blowing up all the end of October.
Yeah.
But
well, one of my favorite spots where like I saw 9 bucks in like 3 days it's a community scrape on the edge of in between two bedding areas where there's a funnel on the side of a big hill.
Yep.
And the topography just goes like this, and there's a bunch of little lines, and they just go back and forth, and it's actually next to a neighborhood, and they'll just go back and forth into the mountain laurel. And at the top, it's like a mossy point, kind of like one of those shorts you just posted. So like they just bed
Yep.
down there, the does, and there's just poop everywhere and rubs. And then there's like one big hemlock, and there's just a giant bed next to it. And I know they bed up there because when I was an idiot and I tried to like spot and stalk them with a bow from like, they would see me 400 yards away. It's not thick enough where they were at. They just bed right on the cover. So I'd try to sneak up, and I know they wouldn't see me. And then once I started to use my climber, like I killed one the opening day of New Hampshire, and then I killed one in October, and it's kind of close to Massachusetts too. So then I like went probably 600 yards away and shot one there too. So like I had 3 deer off the
Wow,
same spot in one season. So that was fun. But
that's cool.
that's just like now I'm like expanding because those bucks aren't very big. So I just kind of like passed a bunch there and just filmed them. Just had a fun time. This is my first time seeing like chasing activity and just enjoying it. So,
Cool.
but like you said, I think the first week is interesting, and I don't know if it depends on like when hunting pressure and season like starts, because in Mass I feel the same way. If I could hunt the first week of September, I could kill a big buck every year. But if the hunting season was then maybe I'd be saying the grass is greener in New Hampshire. I don't know. So
Possibly, but um, yeah, I mean, I'm sure hunting pressure has something to do with it, but a lot of the bucks that I'm hunting, they really don't get little to no pressure. So I think it's just more of a
yeah, all my bucks get
behavior that,
pressured.
yeah, yours do. Yeah, we're in a totally different boat. I mean, I hunt a lot of bucks that I'm hunting. There's a good chance if I don't get them, they're just gonna die. Of old age. And the truth of the matter is, I'm not going to get a lot of the ones I'm hunting. That's just the way it is. But they're just very, you know, big woods deer, just low pressure. And I've seen, you know, and they're not even pressured much by me. I work a lot. I only get to hunt on days in the middle of November. I can take off or whatever, but I don't even pressure them much. And I see November or September 1st to September 15th, tons of daylight activity. Then it seems to kind of, as September goes on, it kind of slows down until the beginning of October. And then it just like totally shuts down in October. It's mostly nighttime stuff. You have to be right on top of them to get daylight stuff in the beginning of October. And then, like I said, 16th, 18th, they'll start daylighting again. But yeah, they don't have the season in the beginning of September is because we probably kill them all.
Yeah.
you know?
No, it's the thing with like out west, I harp on this all the time, but like mule deer are so dumb in August. Like they just
Mhm.
bounce around and then they just look at you.
Yeah.
Then they can run miles, but then you have them also in the winter range. Like you can't hunt in the winter range unless you have a special tag out there, because it would be so easy. They're all down low because of the snow. You hop into an ag field and you
Right.
can shoot one from 400 yards. But I do something interesting on my phone. Like I always keep track of all the deer, all the bucks I've seen ever, on what days I've seen them, the temperature, and where it was. So that's something I do because
Yeah.
I've used that and been like, oh, I saw a buck this day. I'm gonna hunt here next year, and kind of like on a similar 3 day kind of span.
Yeah.
And let's see, there was one, the biggest buck I ever hunted. I just want to make sure I'm reading it right. So it was October. Okay, here we go. So this 15th, 16th, and 17th on a new moon, at sunset, a spike horn would come out, and he still had dots from being a fawn. He would come out,
Yeah.
he'd chew the white oaks, and then he'd head over the brick wall, go into private to the apple orchards. Then I'd wait 30 more minutes, then a doe would come, and it was probably a button buck. I can't tell. But then an 8 point would come, and right with the 8 point would be the 140-inch 9 point. So
Wow.
that happened 3 days in a row, but they were all out of range. So what I did was I moved trees because my climber, I was limited. If I had a saddle, I would have killed them. And from the ground, it was
Dang.
just too open. But this was like my first year going out of state into mass hunting, so I knew what I was doing, but I just was limited.
Right.
So I switched spots. I went through like the rock wall crossing. I tried there, but then he came in the other way. And then I
Oh
tried the
yeah.
other spot, and then he came from where I was the day before. So it was like a roundabout way for 3 times, and then the 8-point came in, and I moved my camera arm, and I was 25, 30 feet up in a tree, but the hill was almost as level. 10 feet would be like level going down, so they could see right up. And he spotted me at 60 yards, the big one, and he wouldn't come in. So, yeah,
Stuff.
it happens. But like you said, that just backs up the historical data of what you're saying. Like, the end of October, they start checking them again in daylight sometimes. So.
Yeah, that's a cool thing about all the cameras that I've run in the last like 10 years. I
How
just
old are
am
you?
able to see. I'm 27.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in the last 10 years, that's when I mean, it's gradually gotten you could say it's getting worse or better, whatever way you look at it, but it's been progressively getting more as I get older. But when I was 17, I probably had 2 or 3 cameras, and now I have probably 50, but I'm only running like probably 35 of them at the moment. But I always like to keep like 15 of them on hand. That way, if you know, I always have them to deploy if like I stumble into some craziness. I don't like to have them all out. Seems like I always need to go, but it's so cool to just be able to. Like I like running cameras just as much as I like to hunt. Like I just like learning about the deer and seeing where getting history with deer, and I'm always kind of like pushing into new areas too and figuring out if the area holds big deer. And like literally I got a bunch of cameras out this year. 100% I will not hunt there. Like I'll never step foot in there this year. And I'm just this next spring, then I'll get a little better of an idea. And then maybe next year I'll do a few more cameras in there. And I probably won't even hunt it that year. But like I'm always like thinking out like 2 or 3 years. That's just kind of the way I do it. But
Yeah,
it's fun.
I know Connor's pretty similar. I was talking to him. I asked him, and he was like, "Yeah, I have like 30 something," but he said I don't hunt half the areas like the year that I put him down, which totally makes sense. I understand that, but
Yeah.
I know some of like the bigger names, the Brett Joys and those Steve Shirks, they've got hundreds of them. So
Right. Yeah. No. For me, I would run more if I had the time, but the amount that I have out now, literally from basically like let's call it April to July, every single Saturday, I am either putting cameras out or retrieving cameras or filling batteries, or like it just takes up that much time to where
are
it's
they
like
cell cameras?
I have 5 cell cameras
Oh,
now,
okay.
and they're sweet. I really like them.
Yeah.
But I have a lot more of just regular SD cameras. And the cell cameras for me, they hurt me more than they help me, because when I'm at work, I'm getting pictures of bucks and it's like just kind of drives me nuts. And I also firmly believe in a lot of the country that I hunt, if you get a picture of a buck on a cell camera and you're not there, because a lot of these bucks, they got big swings that they do, like 4 or 5 mile loops. And if you get a picture of them and you're not there, you probably shouldn't go there, because chances are he's not going to be there. He's already gone through,
Yeah.
so you want to time it. You know, I know there's guys I've heard in the suburban stuff that kind of abuse them. Like they, get a
100%.
picture of a buck and then yeah, it's like I even have people that are uh, like close around me that, uh, like I'd say, like I'm friends with, that hate cell cameras because they think it's like cheating. And it's like the bucks that I'm hunting and the amount of time that I have, it's really not cheating. Like I can't just most of my cell cameras are 2.5 hours away driving
Yeah.
distance from my house. Like, it's like maybe I could go there the end of the week or whatever, or the next day, but it's not going to do me any good.
Well, now in
But
New Hampshire, you can't even if you wanted to within 24 hours. So now that's like a new rule.
right.
But in
Well,
Mass,
it's the
like if I
same
get a
count. Yeah.
suburban picture of a deer in Mass, I could easily run over there in 40 minutes because my work's pretty flexible, so I can do whatever I want, kind of with my job right now. So that's nice, but
That's awesome.
that's
Yeah, good
mostly
for
just
you.
in the summer. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's I'm excited for the
Yeah, that's
season.
pretty good.
I just don't want to burn myself out too fast, because we get into that like if we hunt too much. I don't know about you. Some people don't get burnout, but I
Yeah, no, I don't.
I really don't get burnout. But if I don't know, I know people that do. Some people just can't do it.
Oh
And
yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. But I'm one of the people that I would tell you the absolute best. I'm the absolute best on the very last day I can hunt. Like so December 31st, when I'm in Massachusetts, that's when I'm at my absolute peak for the year. Because December 15th, I'm completely dialed in. I'm in shape. Like everything, like that's just the way I am though. But I totally agree with what you're saying. I know guys personally that get burnt out, and the reason why they don't hunt Massachusetts is because they've been hunting for 3 months and they're done, and they
yeah,
want to sleep in and have bacon and eggs. You know what I mean? But
and that's why the Bucks
uh,
survive.
I just yeah, I don't have that. I get obsessed, and I'm just upset.
Yeah. Well, the
Yeah.
second or third, no, third biggest buck I've killed was in Mass, and that was in shotgun season in December
Yep.
in
Yep.
Mass. And it was like, and I killed that with my bow, and I guarantee a lot of those guys were there was three other guys in that little suburb that were hunting around me within probably 1,000 yards, and all those guys I think were done for the season.
Oh, guaranteed. Yeah, a lot of guys are done by that time. My biggest buck ever I shot on Christmas Eve. Yes.
That big one.
Yep, the big one. Yep, I think you can kind of see him. He's that one right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Dude, that's a freaking was everybody like I hunted that buck or whatever?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's like 4 guys that had game camera pictures of him, and it's bigger woods where I shot him, but a lot of people knew of the deer. I mean,
Yeah.
I think he had been big for like the last 3 or 4 years, from what I can tell. So he's an old buck,
Yeah.
definitely. But it was the first time I had ever been there.
Well,
On
it's
snow.
crazy who comes out of the woodworks once a big buck's like shot. Because
Mhm.
before social media, like I used to think there was no big deer in New Hampshire, which is still hard to find a big deer, like a big deer. Um, I guess it's
Right.
what your perspective is on what's big. So, my
Yeah.
perspective on what's big a couple years ago would have been a 120 is a giant. Now I'm trying to be better every year. So and I don't shame
Yep.
because I would shoot a spike if I wanted to shoot a spike. I have goals of my own personal belief, and I want something that's more mature. And there's not a 4-year-old spike, so that's
Yep. Yeah.
all
No.
I
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. It's all about what you want, man. Like I know personally, I love the meat, so I do let a lot of bucks go. But like last year, I let 3 bucks go in Vermont, and by doing that, I was so stubborn. I was trying to get a big one in Vermont because it's been a few years since I've gotten a good one in Vermont, and I was like, I just got to keep trying, and keep letting bucks go. And then I'd only been able to hunt New Hampshire one day, and
Yeah,
I really screwed myself because my opportunities in New Hampshire are much greater than they are in Vermont. So, my stubbornness sometimes it's like, man, maybe I should have popped one of those smaller bucks and moved over to New Hampshire. I would have had deer meat and then probably killed a bigger buck. So, I mean, it's this year I'm gonna try to be better about. I'm gonna try to kill a bear. That's gonna be one of my goals. Really fill the freezer up with some good burger, and then kill a couple does with my bow if I can. I'm not gonna have that pressure on the freezer, and I can be more selective. But you know, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I don't really get. I mean, I get excited over a 130-inch buck, but like I'm really like starting to be like I'm looking for like the 150 plus type deer. That's what kind of like gets me going, like gets me excited
Yeah.
to be there. But then it's kind of cool because I'm a tracker. A lot of the bucks that I track, I have no idea what they are because so
Yep.
like I've killed some really big ones tracking antler wise, but I've killed a lot of smaller ones tracking too. Um,
Yeah. It's
you know,
kind
I've
of an
killed a lot
odds
like a
game.
hundred. It's an odds game, so it's like the big antlered ones that I shot tracking. I was just fortunate that they happen to be just megas, but you know, I've killed 100 inchers tracking too. You know, but
Yeah.
or I've killed a big 4-pointer tracking because you know of where I was. It could have been a big buck, but it was a split second decision, and I shot, and it was a 4-pointer. But you know, there's a lot of cases like that. So I
Yeah.
try to be selective, but especially I'm more selective when it's bare ground. I guess
Yeah.
I'm
No,
I'm going
100%.
into areas. I'm going into areas that I know there's a really big one, and I'm trying to only hunt like big sign. But then when I'm tracking, I'd say probably my standards come way down
Yeah.
because a lot of the split second decisions that go along with tracking very rarely even think about how big the buck is when you're shooting tracking.
Yeah.
It's usually so fast that you just know that it has antlers basically.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like when I'm gonna be tracking this year in like Maine or New Hampshire with a muzzle loader, I'm gonna be like for one of the tags I'm gonna hold out for a giant and the other tag for another state since I'm like spoiled this year and I can do multiple states, I'm gonna just like if it's brown, it's down basically for like antlers when
Yep.
I'm tracking a deer. But it's kind of interesting, like how Blood and other people have talked about this, but sometimes there's and I was talking to Rodney Elmore about this at Huntstock. The buck that I killed is like 18 inches wide and I bow hunted it. It was during the October snow that happened 3 years ago. And it's like 18 inches wide, has no brow tines, has like 4 or 5 points, and it had 8 inch hooves. It was like a hundred and
Wow.
eighty pound 2.5 year old. Like it
Wow.
looked it had the coat of a mule deer. Like it was gray. Like the bucks.
Wow.
I wish I kept the hide, but I wasn't gonna mount them just based on the size and I was poor. So
Hmm.
but it was the coolest hide I've ever seen. Like it just looked like a dark gray. He was not brown at all, which is kind of cool. But
No kidding. Just an interesting looking buck, huh?
yeah,
Yeah, no, I think tracking you should shoot a lot like every one that you track just for the experience
yeah,
because it's such a different slash difficult thing to do if you've never done it. I think if you get if like let's say you get on a 4-pointers track, if you actually have an opportunity to shoot that deer while tracking it, I think you should, you know, just for the notch in the belt. Um, but yeah, I mean, I try to be selective with the tracks I take. I'm only kind of looking for I can kind of tell if it's an older buck by the track. Places like Massachusetts where a lot of times even a really big buck doesn't have a big track, there's still some subtleties that you can pick up on with the track. Like a big one for me is when the deer they'll turn their front feet out when they're walking. That seems to be like it's when their back starts to kind of go. I think it's
yep.
like arthritis sets in and it pushes their front feet out.
Or like a
That's a
wider
really big
stance.
one. Um, yeah, wider, and they'll just kind of literally like a young will be like this, and then an older one they'll kind of start doing more of this
Mm,
thing. And I mean, walking on the back of their feet, that's like a big one. Um, some guys will say, "Oh, he's dragging his feet," it means it's a big buck. Well, not necessarily. It just means it's a tired buck. Um, spike horns drag their feet when they're tired from running does for the last 3 days too, So the dragging of the feet, I think, is more of it's a rut thing. They're just wicked tired. They're not slept in the last week.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, is there any? I always ask people this every time I have them on. I know it's late, so I won't keep you too long. But do you have any crazy stories or like almost getting horned by a buck or anything like that? Any stories you want to tell?
No, I've never gotten horned by a buck. Let me think. Something crazy.
Or like spit on a
Hmm.
deer or something. Like I had a bear climb my the tree I was in with my climber, like a 300-pound bear. That was a crazy story for
Wow.
me. Yeah.
That is pretty crazy. I was coming out of the woods 2 years ago, and I was hunting fairly far back, and like I'd say probably 2.5 miles from the road. And when I was coming out, I could hear this pack of coyotes in the distance, and there's a bunch of them. Like, sounded like a whole pack of them, and I was like, what are the chances that I'm coyotes when I'm walking out? And sure enough, they kept getting closer and closer and closer, and I had my headlamp on, and all of a sudden, boom, here are all the dogs. They kind of came like both sides of me. There was like 8 or 9 of them, and I was videoing with my phone. I was yelling at them, and they had no idea what I was. They were just kind of working their way up the ridge, and I had I had an arrow out of my quiver, and I'm like holding it,
Ready to
because that's like
stab.
the closest. I mean, what else are you gonna do? I'm
Yeah.
out of here, But that was definitely very interesting because I was outnumbered, to say the least. But they ended up running off. But that was a little spooky because there were so many of them, and it was almost weird when I was yelling at them, when they were kind of around me, when I could see a pile of them in my headlamp. They weren't as like scared as I thought they should have been. They kind of like stood there and like looked at me,
Trying to figure it out.
and they kind of like, trying to figure it out. But you would almost think that they would just kind of take off when they know that I'm there. But
Yeah, I think it
so yeah,
depends like
that's kind of a
what
crazy
they are.
story.
Because I don't know,
Right.
if you're by yourself, it's different than if you're with multiple people. I feel like they treat you completely different. They'd be more afraid. It's like every bear in
Yeah,
southern
no,
New
you're probably
Hampshire I've
right.
come in contact with, they just run from me. They're more scared of me than like they're not aggressive with me where I live.
I've got a pretty good bear story. I was turkey hunting out on the backside of this ridge that I'd never been to before, and it was wicked steep, like wicked, like ledgy and shale, and we were fairly high up, and we're going along, and all of a sudden, come around the corner, and boom, the bear cub like 30 yards in front of me, and I was like, John, there's a cub right there. And then another cub appeared behind the ledge, and I was like, oh
Gosh.
boy. And we were like right there. Yeah. And then Mama Bear comes out behind them, and she sees us. And when she sees us, like, we're on like some pretty precarious ground. Like, it's not easy to go up or down, or, we're kind of on the only bench you can walk on, and so were they. And she grabbed the first cub. I wish I was filming, but I wasn't. She grabbed the first cub by the back of the neck with her mouth and kind of flung it up on this tree. And the cub stuck to the tree and started crawling up. And then the other cub just ran and jumped on the tree. And she got on the tree below them and climbed up behind them. And John and I are just sitting there watching this, like, what in the world? And she pushed those cubs way up into the top of this tree, like way up. And once she got them up into the top of that tree, she came sliding back down. She reared right back, and she started smacking her like teeth together, like like really loud, and she bluff charged us. She came like 10, 15. She angled off on a big rock and she just stood on it watching us. And the whole time, John and I we had our turkey guns, safeties off, like on this thing's nose. And I swear,
Jeez.
if it got any closer, like we were gonna start shooting because like it was that gnarly. And once she got up on that rock, she just kind of stood there, and she might have smacked her jaws a few more times, but she was pissed off. So John and I just slowly walked away with our, like we walked away with us like facing her with, I mean, but it was almost bad. Like it was, she got like 30 feet from us
Yeah.
and like running right at us full bore. But that's my gnarliest bear encounter, was a mama bear with the cubs.
No, anything with a mother
You
instinct,
hear?
moose. I've moose encounters like that with calves, and it's no joke.
Yeah. It's scary. Moose are big, dumb
Yeah.
creatures.
No, my buddy thinks they're like so
Oh man,
ugly.
I mean, they kind of are. They're kind of big and ugly, but they're so dumb. Yeah, they haven't hunted them in the part of the state that I live in so long that they're just cows. Like
Yeah.
I've walked up on so many big bull moose, and they just look at you like they just don't even give a shit. Like
Yeah.
you have to practically kick them in the ass to get them to run. Like they don't
Yeah.
even, they've never been hunted, but well, at least 20 years or something since they've been hunted in the area of Vermont that I live in. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I got 15 feet from a bull moose in Idaho in a private field I was shed hunting, and there was a mama and a baby, and there was a bull moose, and you can hear it slightly on the video. It's terrible quality, and it was low light, but I was like, oh, oh. I was calling to him. It was like, "Roar," and he goes, "Roar, roar," back at me, and I was like, this is cool. So there's a little ditch, like I don't know if you
yeah.
know anything about fields, but there's like a pivot with the pipe going through it. So I kept that in between us because there's a little bit of a barrier. He would have to jump over it, which wouldn't be a problem for a 15-foot tall animal. But I was like,
Oh yeah,
I'll keep this in between us. So I get to like 20 yards, 15 yards. I start to like hear his breath. Like that's how close I was to this moose. And I think he had 11 points on one side because I ended up finding his sheds later that year, which was kind of a cool story. But
yeah.
he had 11 on one side and then I think 8 on the other. Anyways, but I got like so close to him and he was a scaredy cat. He was the biggest baby I've ever seen. Speaking of gay animals, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
He was just literally
That's
like,
funny.
he tucked his tail and ran from me because he had no clue what I was and just ran with the mama and the baby. But yeah,
That's too funny.
yeah, the craziest bear story I've ever heard was my buddy was out mule deer hunting and they didn't bring a tent. They were basically just sleeping under the stars. They wake up, one of the kids wakes up in the night in the sleeping bag and he basically says to his buddy like he didn't want to wake him up, but there was a grizzly bear right next to him in the wide open.
Really? Wow.
And he didn't sleep the rest of the night, but he goes to his buddy and he goes, dude, I was gonna wake you up last night, but I didn't want you to die. And he's like, dude, you're full of crap. There wasn't a grizzly bear. And he looks over to the side and there's giant tracks in the ground right next to him.
Wow.
Literally a foot from his head. Because a grizzly bear's paw would crush your skull. Just stand, even if it's playing around. And he said
Right.
it was literally breathing on him while he was sleeping, and he just tucked his head and just hoped that it didn't do anything. So that's
Oh
probably
my
the craziest
gosh.
story I've heard from that.
That is gnarly.
Anyways, but it says 2 minutes left on the timer, so I'll let you go. And your wife's probably pissed that I kept you so long. So
Oh no, she's cool. She's a good sport.
yeah,
She knows I like to talk about deer hunting, so
yeah, I need to find someone that will
yeah.
let me do that.
That was fun. Oh yeah, you will. You will. They're out there. I didn't know if they were, but they are. Right
Yeah,
one.
they're a rare breed.
They are. You're a rare breed, aren't you, Maggie? She grew up in a hunting family, so
Okay.
it was kind of a little easier of a transition than
Awesome.
But yeah,
Sweet.
cool, man. It was fun.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you, and sorry I didn't get to talk to you too much at
Yeah, it was good
Huntstock.
meeting
It
you.
was kind of crazy.
No, that was my fault too, because I did like, I forget how many podcasts, like 6 or 8 podcasts. I haven't even gone. So I just talked, and it was just one of
I
those
gotcha.
things.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I hope you have a good rest of your night. See ya.
Yep, you too, man. See ya.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I know I had fun. I love hearing hunting stories, and I hope all of you did too. Thanks for watching, and have a good rest of your day.